And we conclude with Tim Tosta, who's one of San Francisco's leading land use attorneys. But you are with us on a very different subject, one that I have been following through your accounts, working with the dying at the Laguna Honda Hospice. Why don't you tell us how you, with all the commitments you have and all the success you've had, would find yourself doing that?
Well, I became a hospice volunteer at Laguna Honda about 4 years ago. I was introduced to the volunteer work there through a friend who expressed to me that it was one of the most wonderful and fulfilling things he'd ever done. And when he said that, it registered with me, and I was trained through the Zen Hospice Project, which is a San Francisco nonprofit that trains and staffs the Laguna Honda Hospice. And in the process of going through the interview, I was talking to the person who screens to make sure that the volunteers are ready for the kind of work that it is. Mm-hmm. And he raised the question of, did this have anything to do with your cancer? And you know, it was really interesting because I hadn't thought about it until that moment, that there is some connection between having survived cancer and my connection to hospice that just rang true. And as I entered into the work, I found it to be remarkable.
The stories that are there have been a couple of series on ABC and other channels where either newsmen or commentators were survivors of cancer, and they're affected for the rest of their lives. And the people, they focused on this, and you know, I mean, it's obvious there's a bond. You can see that visually when people get together. You, in other words, did not do this hospice work because you were a cancer survivor, but you did it because you wanted to. Did you want to break out of the mold you were in?
You know, if I wouldn't want to bet money on the reason, because it probably came from so many different directions, but the cancer experience helped me realize that what I was engaged in my career and what I was engaged in my social life and the like was probably not enough, and that there was some part of me that needed fulfillment that wasn't being met. And the interesting thing is, on a bet, if you'd told me I'd be doing, you know, public service work, I would have not guessed that would have been the choice.
Yeah, you know what I'm curious about is that you're without question, one of the top land use attorneys in San Francisco, which is an aggressive occupation with hazards. I mean, you've got to be tough to do that kind of work, both analytically and in negotiating. When you go to the hospice, you have to be very sensitive.
I'd be happy to explain the
How
difference.
can you go back and forth?
Well, you know, the process, the last 4 years have taught me that I really had led my life in compartments. That is, I had my professional, what I call my suit life, which is I dressed up, I became this professional. I felt often like a gladiator. And then at some point I'd go home and I'd take off the suit and I was supposed to become this other person. And what hospice opened me up to was the fact that when you compartmentalize yourself like that, you cause yourself an enormous amount of stress. And the work with hospice has really allowed me to reshape the way I practice law.
How's that?
Well, dying people are extraordinary. I mean, I guess I should delineate that we're dealing with folks who are in the process of dying, who, if they haven't lost their cognitive ability, are aware of their status. And they're going through evaluating their lives, knowing that there's not a great deal left. And their process of going through that evaluation is incredibly instructive and helpful to me in my life to see that we're all going to have to do that at some point. And what it's forced me to do is bring that inquiry that I could wait to the last month or two of my life and bring it forward and start dealing with what a finite life means now, and be, in many ways, more accommodating to change, less of a control freak, more perceptive.
But it doesn't blunt your ability to be as tough as anyone, as your reputation has been, a successful land use attorney in California.
Yeah, I think you can be successful without being a blunt instrument. And I've tried to bring the best finesse opportunities to the table. But at the end of the day, there is a notion of combat. I found this wonderful analogy in Aikido. Aikido talks about combat as an opportunity to get to know your combatant, as an opportunity for him to educate you and you to learn his perspective. And that's the analogy that I use now in dealing with the law.
So in other words, it could actually be the other way around, that the lessons learned about what life is for and how you react to it and how you live it can actually, that vigor of dying, there's a vigor to being aggressive, not letting it overcome you, but to take it on is also the same thing you do in your business then.
Well, one of the things I think there are a number of things that people go through when they're dying, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has written brilliantly on it, but my view is that I see people dealing with five major issues. They're dealing with change. Enormous orders of magnitude of change are overcoming them as they go through the death process. The second is control. It's very closely related. They can't control things they used to do, like as simple a thing as feeding oneself or going to the bathroom. The third thing they're dealing with is perceptions. What's important starts to radically shift.
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, and then there's this element, if they're lucky enough, to have a moment of discovery. That all these really global things that they were eating up their time, controlling things, resisting change, all of a sudden there's discovery of the really simple things that are in front of you. A good meal, a flower, an animal coming into the hospice ward. And then the last, and I think the most significant, is they learn about the relationship of one person to another. And for me, that relationship part has been enormously influential to me. Because I realized that many people in my life were not really integrated. They were kind of passing characters, and I've really started to pay much more attention to who's in my life and for what reason. And
how many of the people that you deal with have God in their life, and how many don't, and how do each react?
That's a very interesting question. I rarely talk about God.
But how many of them need that?
I don't know.
Do you start seeing people who are more? I mean, if a person believes that there's an afterlife, that would be far different than not believing that. Do you see a difference in the way those groups of people behave when they're facing their certain death within a week or 2 weeks or a month?
Actually, I think I have to state this carefully. I think that death is so overwhelming that what is happening doesn't fit as neatly into a God, no God category, and it doesn't fit very neatly into am I a Protestant, Catholic, or Jew category. It's such a, and I will use this word guardedly, but it's such a remarkable and almost holy process to watch someone as they're in their last days, that I think that the terms that we use in connection with religion don't really fit the order. Well, because it's so much bigger than the attributes that we use and the words we use in our language. Death is an all-consuming process, and it's an enormous amount of work. It's really remarkable to watch how the body disengages from itself, and people in that process can't be bothered with many of the notions that they carried on in their lives, and but I will tell you, I have been brought closer to a spiritual content in my life through this work than I ever imagined I would be. There is just something enormously powerful that you can't pigeonhole into this is just the way the science works, or this is just the way the culture works. There's just something much more huge there to be watched. And when you're with someone, when you're holding someone's hand as they expire, there is a sense you've been touched by something incredibly powerful. And I don't bother to pigeonhole it or put it in any particular place, but I know it's happened.
How about in your own case? What did it do to you in terms of how you saw things and the temporariness of things?
Well, I think it's what started me on this path in the first instance. I was given a really negative diagnosis. The first doctor spoke to me, said I might live 2 years. And I had to wait for surgery to get a little more clarification as to whether or not it was as bad as he thought. After that surgery, the thought was that it really wasn't as bad as they thought, but they wouldn't know for 7 years. So I had sentencing. I had sentencing on how I had to stay focused, and I used that to try and figure out what were my more fundamental values. What were the things that were going to make my life work, and how was my life going to be brought together? And the interesting thing about that was around 1991, and the material available for you to restructure your life and how to think about a restructured life after cancer was really not very well developed. So I found myself as a kind of a bookish person studying psychology, studying neuroscience, studying cancer, and I eventually increased the range of what I was looking at until I started practicing yoga. And then the yoga practice really informed me, and I began to study Buddhism and Eastern religions, which brought me through a full circle of religious studies. And all along, my horizons got wider and wider, and I just started to find myself being much more aware of each day as I got it, and much more unforgiving if I blew it by losing my focus on whether it was a good day and whether I was caring for people. So, you know, in answer to your opening question, how did I get to hospice? I think I knew that I needed to care for more people. And I've told my wife that, and my kids that every time I go to the ward, I feel like I'm growing my heart. It's just this remarkable thing where you think you've been generous and kind, and you realize that you've actually been self-delusional. And when you're really kind is when you're with someone who really needs you.
Let me ask you this question. You see this pattern among those who are successful to devote more and more of their final days to altruism and charitable giving. I mean, I don't think there's been a multi-millionaire hedge fund or Microsoft chairman who's not moving in that direction.
Right.
Okay, so everyone does that. It's fashionable now to do that. Do you think that people can do what you did or you're doing now and integrate it into the early part of their lives when they're the most aggressive and they're building their wealth or they're building their career or whatever? Or I'm going back to my original question. Does it run in the face of another energy that you need to succeed in this tough American environment? Or could people start devoting more time before they retire, before they've made all their millions, and now start to become fashionably altruistic?
Well, one of the reasons
we only got a minute.
One of the reasons I talk about this is I think there's enormous opportunity to get into this work.
Even now.
Even now.
In the middle of your career.
A lot of the people I work with, a lot of the other volunteers are in their 20s, and they're incredible people. The community of volunteers is the most remarkable group of people I've ever seen, and they are caring people from all walks of life. And you know, if we have some more time another day, I'd like to tell you some of the stories of the people who have been engaged in this work.
And many of them are in the middle of their careers and are doing just fine.
They're doing really well.
Well, we're glad you're doing fine. Obviously, if it's 1991 they gave you 7 years to decide, you're well past that.
I'm through that period.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. For program schedules, post-production notes, and free streaming video of select interviews, visit our website at www.sfunscripted.com.